Hey, what's up guys? This is Joshua Nygaard. Welcome to the first entry of my video blog on the framework of man. I suppose for this first entry, what I want to do is just go over a simple overview of how I view spirit, soul, and body, so that for future entries, you'll have a pretty decent idea of where I'm coming from. Not that you couldn't get things from what I said if you didn't have it, but it just helps if you kind of have the background of the framework from which I'm understanding all this. So, a little background, I grew up in the charismatic branch of Christianity, technically Word of Faith, and such a blessing. I'm so thankful for it. But the way we were taught it was that man is a spirit. He has a soul. He lives in a body. He's a threefold being. The spirit is the real you. The soul is not the real you. And the body is not the real you, but the spirit is. And I'm not sure I completely agree with all that. I agree with most of it. I agree with a lot of it. But I'm not so sure that your soul and your body are not part of the real you. And the reason is because I was thinking about this a couple months ago, is one of the teachings, which I completely and totally agree with, is that we believe that man is made in the image of God. And by virtue of man being made in the image of God, we believe that if you can discern the threefold nature of man, spirit, soul, and body, then you also have a relatively decent understanding of the triune nature of God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Well, if that's the case, if my being is more or less a reflection of God's being, then if I'm going to say that I am a spirit, I have a soul, and I live in a body, that my spirit is the real me, my soul is not the real me, and my body is not the real me, then what am I supposed to say? That the Holy Spirit is the real God, and the Father is not the real God, and Jesus is not the real God, but the Holy Spirit is the real God? And I thought about that. It's like, well, that seems to, if you just take that at face value, then that sort of framework of understanding seems to support an actual heretical view of God. And it's not that I disagree with what they say, but it's like, what do we mean by that? Because if you take that quite literally, like I said, you really are implying a heretical view of God, that only one of the members of the Godhead is really God, just like one of the parts of my being is really me. I think it's more like they're all parts of my being, but they have different functions. And it's not so much that my spirit is the real me, as much as my spirit is a very, very special part of me. It's the part of me that reaches out to God. It's the part of me that can interact with the spirit realm and go places and do things that my soul and body simply cannot. It's the essence of my being. I could go with that, but I don't think it's the only part of me that's really me. I think that the soul and body are both a part of me, and if you look at it, when our bodies get resurrected, our bodies really are going to be alive and more part of us than ever. I could see an argument to say that because our bodies are fallen, they're not really part of the real you because they've been affected by the curse and they need to be resurrected. They're currently bodies of death. But even in that, you can see that Jesus coming to earth, he gave himself for us and he experienced the death in the body. And him being representative of God's body, the Holy Spirit being the Spirit, Father being the soul, Jesus being the body, when Jesus died on the cross and became spiritually dead for a moment, you can see that it was basically the role of an intercessor, that God himself, for a very brief moment of time, found out what it was like to have a fallen body. But then after that, Jesus got resurrected, and he's now seated at the right hand of God, just as he always was, but just as much God as God is God. And so you're supposed to say that, well, my body isn't part of the real me. For all of eternity, especially in its resurrected state, my body will be part of my being, part of what God made me to be. Not just to have, but to be. It will be part of my being. And so that's how I understand it. Now, how do the spirit, soul, and body interact? That would be the second thing, I suppose. And what about the heart? And what about some other concepts that aren't usually talked about in charismatic circles? So the way it's usually taught is the spirit is the part of you that contacts God, which I believe. That the soul is mind, will, and emotions, which I don't completely disagree with, but with reservations. And the body is, well, the body, pretty straightforward. And so, how I see it is, I read a Jewish rabbi on a website about Judaism to see what they thought about that. Because I was just hungry. Like, how does this system actually work? And the way they described it, the Jews have an extra concept called neshama. Now, see, in Hebrew, the word for soul is nephesh. The word for spirit is ruach, but there's another word, neshama, which represents another part of your spiritual being. And all three of those words mean breath in slightly different ways, but they all mean breath. And so it seems like your soul, your nephesh, is your life breath, almost the breath that's the most connected to your body. Your spirit is the part of your breath that can move and operate in the spirit dimension, and spirit means wind. That's where he gets it. That the neshama is the nephesh is your resting breath that's in your lungs. The ruach, the spirit, is the breath that goes from you, and the neshama is the breath that, once released, rests upon something and affects change. And you can see that the example he used was with a glass blower. That you have the resting air in your lungs. That air then has to proceed to come out of your mouth. That would be the spirit. The resting breath being your nefesh has to come out. That would be the spirit. And the way a glass blower works is that air, as you're blowing the glass, the air from your lungs or whatever air you're feeding aids in being able to affect the glass. And so your neshama is that part of your spirit that, when it rests upon something, affects change. Something like that. The neshama in Hebrew, it seems to be that word that is used when it's the breath of God entered the nostrils. It's the breath that actually comes out of your nostrils. It's interesting. I'm not claiming I understand it completely, but it's a concept that's scriptural. It's not just a Judaistic concept. It's actually a Hebrew word that is actually in the Hebrew Bible that all throughout my life just never was even talked about, ever. And so a great example, the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord. This is one that charismatics love to use. That word spirit is not ruach, the typical word for spirit, but neshama. Neshama. The neshama of man is the candle of the Lord, in other words. And so it seems to me that that's basically true, that your nefesh is basically your life breath, the resting breath, the breath that's closest to your body, that interacts the most with your physical being. Your spirit is that breath that is able to go from you as wind, because one of the words for meanings of spirit is wind. It's able to go from you and move and operate in the spirit realm. Your neshama is that part of your spirit that, once it rests upon something, is able to affect change, illumination. It involves change, illumination, and things of that nature. So, the soul, I think, is more than just the mind, will, and emotions. For a large part, the Lord showed me this. I saw this when I was a teenager because I thought a lot, and that can be good or bad, I suppose. But even as a teenager, I saw this in Revelation because I heard about, I think it was Mr. Strong with his concordance, that he talked about the Hebrew word for soul meaning something different in the Old Testament than the New Testament. I've heard people talk about that and preach that, and at the time I was just curious, so I was seeing, and it seemed to me like the soul sort of meant your life being, just your being as life. And then in the New Testament, it's mind, will, and emotions. That's how it's typically taught. If we differentiate between concepts of soul, it's usually almost a dispensational thing, that the soul was something in the Old Testament, but it became mind, will, and emotions in the New Testament. But then I saw in Revelation where it talks about John seeing those who had been beheaded, I believe for their testimony for Jesus, and it said he saw the souls of those who had been beheaded, not the spirits. But we usually think about people in heaven being spirits, and they are. But John didn't say that he saw the spirits of those that were beheaded, but the souls. So I thought, like, well, if that's the case, is John having a spiritual vision of the Lord, seeing literally the last of the last days, the end of this age and dispensation, and what he wants to get across from us so desperately is that he was able to see the minds, wills, and emotions of those that had been beheaded? It's like, that doesn't make sense. And yet, if you just take a hardline view, well, that's what it is, mind, will, and emotions, and that's it. Well, what else is there to think? It's like, no, I don't agree with that. I'm not opposed necessarily to the spirit, to the soul involving mind, will, and emotions, but I do not believe that it is just that. Like I said, the spirit is the breath that goes from you. It is really the essence of you. It is the breath that is able to operate and move and interact with the spirit realm. And then your neshama is something we'll get into later. I kind of went over it already. Your body is also a part of you, not so much as it is now, because it's been affected by the curse. And Paul says that, who shall deliver me from this body of death? Jesus will resurrect it. There'll be a resurrection of the body for those that believe in him, and our bodies will become spiritually alive. And so when that's the case, our bodies really will become really a part of our being. It's not that they're not now, but this body is going to be transformed and transfigured, and it's going to be much more suitable to work with the entirety of the system as God designed it. Let's put it that way. And I don't want to go too long. The final thing I want to say, okay, so I would say that the spirit is different than the heart. I would say that the heart is something like a container or the arena or the playground by which all the different inputs that you experience come into play. So, for instance, you have different voices. You can have this thoughts from your head. Your body can talk to you in the sense that you can get input from what you're feeling, from what you're sensing, emotions, all that. Your soul breath can talk to you. Your spirit can talk to you. Other spirits can try to, get you to do things. And as such, those are all voices that have to be dealt with and weighed and valued and responded to one way or the other, whether you choose to yield to them or choose to not yield to them. And it seems like that mostly happens in the heart, that the heart seems to be a container that contains things, spiritually speaking, but it also seems to be the playground by which these actions and these inputs are weighed. And that's my basic understanding of it, I suppose. There's going to be more to it. There definitely is going to be more to it, but I think that will give us more or less a basic understanding of what I believe to be the general framework of man. And from there, again, it's subject to change, but from there, I think we can start this blog. And if you've listened to this video, you'll have a fairly good idea of where I'm coming from. So stay tuned.